hope you're all well. Today we're going to be discussing how the United States became a target on 9/11. So, today's discussion is going to be about what happened uh, on that day, and then we're going to look at the United States reaction, and then we're going to go back into history and look at some of the developments in U.S. foreign policy that might have caused America to become a target for this kind of attack. And so this is going to be a 3-day lesson. Okay, so we start off on what happened. It was a beautiful morning in September, and two airliners crashed into the Twin Towers, causing them to come down. And so you have a little explanation of what happened in this video, which I hope you watched. But it was a shocking, shocking event for the people who were there, people who lived through it and witnessed it. And then this next clip, as I mentioned, it's a little bit upsetting. You see these students just absolutely shocked at what was happening and terrified. And I think that really comes across in their screaming and they don't know what to do. And so immediately that afternoon on the news, everything stopped, and the news coverage was already pointing to Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda, and they kind of had a feeling, and they knew, I guess, from intelligence that he was responsible for this. So the United States reacted. So abroad, they launched Operation Enduring Freedom. And this was an attack in Afghanistan because that was the base of operation. So the problem with this attack is that it wasn't launched by a specific country. It was launched basically by a criminal organization known as Al Qaeda. And so we couldn't declare war on a particular country. So we attacked Afghanistan because it was basically a lawless place run by the Taliban, and they were allowing Al Qaeda to operate there. Then they're a little bit later, so that was in 2001, and then in 2003 this is happening, where the country believed that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and he was providing terrorists with access to them. There was also an alleged connection between Saddam Hussein, the ruler of Iraq, and the 9/11 attack. And so at this point, the President George W. Bush and his people started to put some pressure on Congress to allow them to use force in Iraq. And so that's why I titled this A War, because it was a very similar situation to what happened in Vietnam, that Congress didn't officially declare war, but they allowed the president to use military force. And so this is something that started this war in Iraq. Saddam Hussein was captured. He was tried by his people in Iraq and executed. But the connection between Saddam Hussein and the 9/11 attack has since been disproven. And so when people are angry at George W. Bush and they talk about the war in Iraq being based upon false pretenses, that's what they're referring to. Okay, so there's certainly a connection between this and what happened in Vietnam. Okay, going on to what happened inside the country. Well, they formed a new cabinet level position called Homeland Security, and that was designed to try to prevent information from falling through the cracks again, the way it had prior to 9/11, because intelligence agencies in our country did have some information about people taking flights, and they arrested one person, but they didn't look at his computer and things like that. So this Homeland Security cabinet position is now designed to try to prevent that type of thing from happening again. And the Congress passed a law called the Patriot Act, which was designed to give the government more power to try to prevent terrorism. So they are allowed to detain foreigners suspected of terrorism without charging them with a crime for 7 days. They can tap phones by suspects and monitor emails or internet use. They can make search warrants valid across state lines. They can order banks to investigate sources of large foreign accounts, and they can prosecute terrorist crimes without time restrictions or limits. So the idea of terrorism as a crime is something new for law enforcement, or it was in 2001, because typically law enforcement was designed to catch people after they commit a crime. But terrorism is something so horrendous. The government now tries to prevent crimes from happening, and so that's why they felt that the Patriot Act was necessary to increase government's power to try to prevent crimes from happening. And of course, this raises questions that people might be concerned about what the impact on our privacy rights. Okay, so let's put in an answer here. Okay, so we need to strike this new balance here. Okay, and so then we can go back into the Cold War a little bit and look at what was going on in history. And so this video is about Nixon's visit to China. Okay, so remember that China was communist at this point. So why is Nixon's visit to China considered a turning point in foreign policy? Well, the American president was visiting a foreign nation at this point in the middle of the Cold War. This is not what I wanted to do. Okay. Okay, so this is something certainly a new thing for the president, and we talked about this during his during our Vietnam lesson, that he was doing this to try to ease tensions with China. So détente is the easing of tensions during the Cold War, and SALT is a strategic arms limitation treaty. So both of these ideas and developments were designed to ease tension in the Cold War. Our enemy is the people who plan 9/11. Might perceive this as weakness because it shows that the United States is not willing to fight, that they're willing to use diplomacy. And so, of course, this is actually a good thing, but through the minds of Al-Qaeda, they might see this as a weakness. Okay, then we go on to talk about what happened during Jimmy Carter's presidency. Okay, so a few different things to note. There's Helsinki Accords, and that's the idea that the United States is going to make human rights a priority when we deal with other countries, and we're going to withhold aid from nations that violate human rights. So Carter was a very religious man, and so this was a priority to him. And also in terms of his respect philosophy, he promised to return the Panama Canal to Panama in 1999 as promised. Remember our last day we were together for the Regents Kids, we talked about the Spanish-American War, but we were also talking about imperialism, and the United States got a 100-year lease on the Panama Canal Strip, and so now he promised to give it back according to the original treaty. Okay, and then there was a major peace event known as the Camp David Accords, where Jimmy Carter invited the leader of Egypt and the leader of Israel to Camp David, the president's retreat, and they worked out a deal. And so there was a peace between Egypt and Israel that is still ongoing today. And so this was a major development. And so on this first video, you see a clip from that happening, and then a year later, President Sadat of Egypt was assassinated for his role in that, but also for other reasons. So Carter's actions demonstrate a new role for the United States because we see the president acting as a peace negotiator for other countries in the world. And how might this be viewed as a new role? Or how might this new role be viewed by our enemies? Well, they might see this as a position of weakness because we're not willing to fight. Okay, another development that they might be annoyed about is helping Israel have a peaceful border between Egypt and Israel. Okay, and that wraps up our conversation for today. And in our next conversation about 9/11, we'll talk about what happened during the Nixon administration that got us embroiled in world affairs. Have a great day, everybody.